In 1971, President Richard Nixon started what is known as the War on Drugs. Nixon started the war on drugs with the intention of eradication, interdiction, and incarceration, meaning he wanted to eradicate drugs from the U.S., prohibit anyone from possessing drugs, and incarcerate those who did not follow the new drug policy. 47 years later, we can see the effect that the war on drugs has had. My proposition is that the war on drugs has had a significant negative effect on the U.S. This claim is substantiated by three main points. 1, the war on drugs wastes money. 2, the war on drugs makes the U.S. a more dangerous place. And 3, the war on drugs ruins lives. My first point is that the war on drugs wastes money. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, the U.S. government spends more than $51 billion a year on the war on drugs. And due to the war on drugs, the U.S. also has the highest incarceration rate in the world. The Vera Institute of Justice found that the U.S. prison population has grown 700% since the 70s. Keep in mind, the war on drugs started in 1971. This high incarceration rate in the U.S. is not only immoral, it's also very expensive. According to the Legislative Analyst Office, it costs roughly $70,000 a year to incarcerate an inmate in California. Now, some people believe that the war on drugs is not a waste of money because it's made forward progress in fixing the drug problem in the U.S. This is unfortunately not true. The war on drugs has not slowed the drug problem, and it has only, in fact, made it worse. My second main point is that the war on drugs makes the U.S. a more dangerous place. While the war on drugs was started with the intention of reducing violence and making the U.S. safer, it has only done the exact opposite. Because of prohibition, the value of drugs has risen, making people more willing to commit more serious crimes for them. Another thing that prohibition does is it increases the potency of drugs on the market. Due to a higher risk, manufacturers create more potent drugs so that they can sell it at higher prices and therefore make up for the risk of prohibition. Now, the increased potency of the drugs, along with the lack of government quality control, has caused for an increase in drug-related deaths in the U.S. According to the New York Times, U.S. drug overdose deaths went from less than 10,000 in 1980 to more than 60,000 in 2015. Even some government officials agree that the war on drugs was a failure. U.S. Senator James Webb says, "Our current policy mix is not working the way we want it to. The ease at which drugs are obtained, the price, and the number of people using drugs, and the violence on the border all show that." My third main point is that the war on drugs ruins lives. The war on drugs not only has a negative effect on the U.S. as a whole, but it also has a substantial effect on individuals' lives. According to a report by the U.S. Government Accountability Office, about 20,000 students each year and about 20,000 students each year are denied Pell Grants, and about 40,000 students lose out on student loans due to a federal law that denies financial aid to college students who have been convicted of drug crimes. Now, obviously, the war on drugs doesn't only affect college students. According to the Drug Policy Alliance, the number of arrests in 2016 for drug law violations is about 1.5 million, and about 1.2 million were for possession alone. Penalties for simple possession vary from state to state, ranging from a small fine of less than $100 to a few nights in jail, all the way to thousands of dollar fines to several years in prison. It all depends on the state that you are incarcerated in. The war on drugs has also made it more difficult for people to fight their drug addiction. Because drug abuse is illegal, drug addicts remain in hiding, concealing their addiction so that they do not receive the help that they need. Many people are too scared of being punished to come out about their drug addiction. For a lot of people, the only way to get addiction treatment is to be arrested. For example, let's say that you are a drug addict. Because of the risk of punishment, you have been keeping your drug addiction in hiding. Now, would you want to come out about your drug addiction and possibly be punished and have your family and friends treat you differently, or just keep it a secret and like continue your addiction? For most people, they wouldn't want to come out about it. And so most people never do receive the treatment that they need until it's too late. In summary, the war on drugs has had a significant negative impact on the U.S. for three main reasons. One is that the war on drugs wastes money. Two, the war on drugs makes the U.S. a more dangerous place. And three, the war on drugs ruins lives. Thank you.
All right, Kurt, the proposition's clearly identified at the beginning of the speech. There's a good preview, so we know what the supporting points are going to be. I think it's pretty obvious that there's controversy on the subject, so I think you're doing okay at the start of the speech setting things up. You signpost the supporting points in the body of the speech pretty clearly. There are a couple of places where there are assertions that needed some evidence. For example, there's an argument that you make right before you get to your second point that says that it hasn't slowed the drug problem, and that's the assertion that you've got there. Now, later on, there's a piece of information that talks about the overdose rate. I think that that's appropriate, but you're really having that in a completely different place, and I think that you need a stronger argument there about the availability and the increased use there, instead of just relying on that one piece of information, which may or may not be applicable to the whole population. The second point, signposted pretty well. The dangers that you're talking about, though, are mostly asserted the same sort of thing. You make a claim about how the value of drugs has increased, which means people are willing to do more to do it, which I assume involves engaging in some crime, but I don't get any examples or data to support that. There's no evidence on that particular one. And then the whole thing about potency is also all asserted. So the second point is a little problematic because the information there is not documented as well as it is in the first and the third point. The third point about ruining lives, there's some arguments about students and their grants. I think that's fine. The data about people dying, that's pretty reasonable there. You've got some good general criticisms of the war on drugs. However, there are, I think, a number of issues that probably still need to be talked about that are not really discussed. Your hypothetical example on the last point really doesn't sound to me like the direction in which most addicts would go in. And by the way, it presumes that people would get in trouble if they sought treatment, and I have no reason to believe that that's the case. Somebody who's got a drug problem is not subject to arrest by going to, whatever one of those rehab clinics is. I'm just trying to think of the name of one of them. What's the one in Malibu that? Yeah, it's one of those swanky ones. It's like going to a resort. But it's not like somebody shows up at the resort and the cops are just waiting there to pick people off when they come into the parking lot. I think that there's a false assumption there. In fact, the argument that you make, I think, would probably be the argument made by the other side. It says the only reason addicts ever get treated is because they get arrested. Otherwise, they're just perfectly happy to stay on the drugs. That would probably be the argument from the other side. I thought it was also nicely presented. Thank you.